South Africa's economy appears to be on a positive trajectory, having successfully avoided a recession in the second quarter of 2024. Key economic indicators such as manufacturing, retail, and wholesale trade sales have shown significant improvement, reflecting a broader economic recovery. This positive momentum is further supported by the recent decline in inflation rates. Inflation eased to its lowest level in 3 years, providing a favorable environment for economic growth and potential monetary policy easing. The Consumer Price Index increased by 4.6% in July compared to 5.1% in June, falling below the expected rate of 4.8%. Professor Andre Roux, Economist, Stellenbosch Business School, joins me for more on this. Thank you,
Good
Professor, for
morning.
joining
Pleasure
me.
as always.
Yeah, good morning. Well, the thoughts about, South Africa's economy avoiding tipping into a recession in the second quarter must be music to your ears. Do you think this marks a watershed in the South African, economy?
It is music, but it's all very relative. Um, as you know, in South Africa, as in many other countries in Africa, a really meaningful growth rate is more towards 4, 5, 6%. So anything below that is really not good enough. But obviously, it's better than nothing. It's better than we were just a few months ago. As you pointed out, there are slowly but surely a few small positive notes coming through. Consumer spending seems to have gathered a bit of pace. And bear in mind that in this country, consumer spending makes up 60% of total demand in the economy. As you quite rightly pointed out, the inflation rate has fallen to virtually where the central bank governor wants it to be, midway through the target range of 3 to 6%, which probably means there's a very good chance that in the next Monetary Policy Committee meeting, they'll lower rates ever so slightly by maybe 25 basis points. We also see the world environment favorable for that, with America likely to lower interest rates. Having said that, it's very early days. Another positive, of course, is the political outcomes recently in this country. And so far, the indications are that markets are viewing the so-called government of national unity in a favorable way. Having said that, there are still many constraints. Our infrastructure is not what it ought to be, especially transport, especially ports. We've been very lucky we have not had so-called load shedding since the end of March. Thank goodness for that. But that could change. We're never quite sure. The global situation, the big uncertainty there, of course, is the oil price going forward. If there were to be an escalation of turmoil in the Middle East or Russia, the oil price might rise. China, Africa's and South Africa's major trade partner, is not in a good shape. So it's very early days. One doesn't want to get too excited, but certainly the condition seems to be somewhat better than any time in the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, for South Africa to get to that 4% growth that you talked about, we definitely need to address underlying vulnerabilities. And you sort of mentioned some of them. But I'd like you to, dwell a bit on addressing these vulnerabilities, especially the domestic ones, that could pose risk to the stability we should be seeing, in the coming quarters.
Mm. Mm. Well, I think there are some well-known obvious factors that play a role. And again, not necessarily confined just to South Africa. So we think about things such as governance and good institutions and stamping out corruption. That's a long-term program. Doesn't happen overnight, but it's crucial. Another obvious one, which lies at the heart of many aspects in the economy, is education, but appropriate and good education. As you know, this country is one of the highest, if not the highest, unemployment rate in the world. That's a result of many factors, one, of course, being education and skilling. And in the absence of appropriate education and skilling, it's difficult to raise the levels of productivity. It's difficult to be competitive. So that's a crucial, again, long-term project. Then, again, like many countries in Africa, we have a young population. At the moment, unfortunately, a big part of that young population is jobless. But if we could turn that around and get almost ensure that all our millions of young people become employed, that could be a game changer going forward. It could convert many countries in Africa into a demographic dividend. The problem is many of these things are long-term projects which don't yield overnight success. But you've got to start somewhere. Looking at the more immediate future, As I've mentioned, we need security, guaranteed supply of energy. We need better infrastructure. We need better management and running of state-owned enterprises. We need a firm, almost commitment and credible stamping out of corruption and poor governance, to mention a few.
Interesting. Well, before we go to the global challenges, that might sort of hinder the stability we're expecting, let's talk a bit about, South Africa's inflation, which of course peaked at 4.6% in July. Now, let's break that down a little. Lower annual rates were sort of recorded for several product groups, and that's notably food and non-alcoholic beverages, transport, and, housing and utilities. Now, despite the overall slowing trend we saw in food inflation, certain categories like, bread and cereals bucked the trend. Do you have any explanation for this?
No, I think each market needs to be analyzed in its own right. Obviously, weather conditions often play a role when it comes to foodstuff, such as wheat-related products or grain-related products. We have experienced over the last number of months in some parts of the country quite severe droughts, as has many other parts of Africa. But I think we also need to bear in mind that the inflation rate has dropped, which is great, but prices are still 4.6% higher than a year ago. And a year ago, they were much higher than the year before that. So the bottom line is that the average, if you like, cost of living today is higher than it's ever been before. All that's happening now is the increase in that cost of living is slowing down. But South Africans still remain cash strapped, still remain in a situation where they've got to turn every single cent very carefully before spending it. And naturally, which is always a sad reality, is that the poorer members of society are the worst hit by rising food prices. Because for poorer members, food can make up 50 or 60% of the entire inflation budget, entire consumer budget. So we mustn't run away with the idea that a drop in inflation rate means that cost of living has fallen. Not at all. It's still higher than ever before. It's just not rising at the same speed.
Well, I remember talking about, global economic factors. I'd like you to speak to us about how global economic factors such as interest rates, commodity prices are likely to impact South Africa's economy. And then I'd like you, maybe a double barrel question. I'd also like you to talk to us about, the potential risks and opportunities that sort of associated with these factors.
Yes, well, if you recall, less than 2 years ago, there were very severe, very serious concerns that the world economy might go into another recession. Inflation rates were exceptionally high across the planet, and therefore so too were interest rates. Now, it looks as if we might not get a global recession because inflation across the planet has fallen quite nicely, which means that there's now the scope for many countries to start lowering interest rates. Some have done so already, some we're still waiting for, like America. Indications coming out of the American Federal Reserve seem to be that this coming September, in a few weeks' time, might see the first drop in interest rates. And very often, countries like South Africa follow suit. We wait for that almost as a kind of a cue to lower our interest rates. See, the problem is, if we were to lower interest rates before the likes of America, then our own currency would weaken rather considerably. As it is, by the way, the currency of this country, the rand, has been remarkably firm over the last few weeks, if anything stronger than a few months ago. So I think we'll take the cue from America lowering interest rates. In America, of course, we have a very interesting election coming up.
Okay.
We'll have to see what the outcome of that will be
Right.
and how that will affect the economy.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Andre Roux. I'm afraid we have to end the conversation here
Okay.
because we're pressed for time. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your time on the show today.